Andy Johnson. This is a pre-recording of a presentation I'll be doing, understanding the science of reading and how children learn to read. These are the things I hope to go over in this presentation, but you don't want to listen to me blabber all the time, so we'll be taking some blabber breaks where you can process in the form of some questions that you can ask or answer. In this presentation, I hope to address two ununderstandings that lead to ineffective reading instruction. The ununderstanding is related to the science of reading and what scientifically based reading research is, and how the brain creates meaning with print. I hope to move from ununderstanding to understanding in my presentation tonight. So let us take a look at the science of reading first of all. But think about these questions as I go through this first section, and you can read them there yourself. So let's take a look at the traditional view of science. Traditional view of the scientific process goes something like this. You get two groups, you measure them before the study begins, you do something to one group, and you don't do something to the other group. You control everything else so that the two groups are as similar as possible except for that one thing. Then after a bit, you measure them to see if there are differences between the two groups. If there are, you can say that the thing you did to the one group was the cause of the difference. Now, many people think of this as the scientific method, often called controlled experimental research or controlled experimental studies. Here you control all the variables except for one thing, the treatment or the independent variable, in order to find out if something was the cause of something else. However, one big idea I hope you take with you tonight is this. There is no such thing as the scientific method. Rather, there are methods of science. Controlled experimental research is only one of many methods of science. So to insist that this is the only method of science that can be used to understand reading and reading instruction is to insist that we look at reading reality through a tube. Our view, and thus our understanding of reading and reading instruction, are greatly impeded with such a tube-shaped view of reality. Yet this is exactly what the U.S. Department of Education and other groups have done. They have mandated that only a particular way of knowing is legitimate. They have insisted that the only knowledge that counts for reading instruction is that which is derived through controlled experimental research. In other words, the same methods used to study bacteria in a petri dish should be used to study children in a classroom. In reading, they call this scientifically based reading research. This insular view demonstrates a limited understanding of educational research and leads to a great ununderstanding of reading and reading instruction. As well, this peephole-based view of reading reality misses a lot of data. And how could anything be truly scientific if it chooses to ignore a wealth of data? So let's take a look at a bit of research by Stephen Kusser, looking at word reading accuracy and comprehension. I bring it up here because this bit of research would be totally dismissed by those who cling tightly to the peephole view of educational research. Yet it tells us much about reading and reading instruction. Kusser's 2016 study focused on word reading accuracy and comprehension of expository text or information text. Starting in 4th grade, students encounter more expository text than narrative text. They move from learning to read to reading to learn. And expository texts are a bit different from narrative text. They have to be approached differently. As well, they have more lexical density, which is a fancy way of saying there are more content words and clauses and concepts jammed into each sentence. For this study, Kusser used 4th grade students from 2 different schools. He examined students' miscues and how they relate to comprehension. Now, a miscue is when what students read during oral reading does not match what's on the page. For example, if the text says, run to the top of the hill, a reader might say, rat to the top of the hill. Saying rat instead of run is an example of a miscue. And we don't call them errors because sometimes miscues are not errors at all, rather mature reading behavior. And this will become more clear in a bit. Kusser looked at 2 types of reading miscues, a meaning disrupting miscue and a meaning maintaining miscue. A meaning disrupting miscue is when the miscued word does not fit within the context of the sentence. The author's intent is disrupted. For example, rat to the top of the hill is an example of this. It does not make sense within the sentence. Meaning is disrupted. A meaning maintaining miscue is a miscued word that maintains the author's intended meaning. For example, if the reader said rush to the top of the hill or runs to the top of the hill instead of run to the top of the hill, the word identified does not match what's on the page, yet the author's meaning, intended meaning, stays intact. So for this study, students read aloud texts and their oral readings were recorded and analyzed. Retellings were used to assess comprehension. Now, most would think that the clauses in which there were no miscues, where students read the words with 100% accuracy, would be more likely to be recalled and comprehended. After all, that's what good reading is, isn't it? Accurate reading? The results. When comparing clauses with meaning maintaining miscues, with clauses with 100% word accuracy or no miscues at all, the clauses in which there were meaning maintaining miscues were significantly more likely to be comprehended and recalled. So this indicates that for comprehending and remembering what we read, accuracy and maintaining meaning is significantly more important than word reading accuracy. So why might this be? Well, in producing meaning maintaining miscues, the reader has to generate an alternative way of expressing the same idea. So this means the readers are attending to deep meaning or deep structure of the idea, or the ideas, while reading more than they're attending to surface structure or the arrangement of letters and words. As well, meaning maintaining miscues tell us that the reader is relying on semantic information or context, as well as syntactic information, which is grammar or word order, not just phonological information. This reliance on all 3 cueing systems is a mature reading behavior. Using only one cueing system, the phonological cueing system, is not. Meaning maintaining miscues are possible only because the reader is attending to the ideas being read instead of the words and the letters. So 3 things to take from this. First, an over-reliance on phonics, on letter-sound relationships, can get in the way of comprehending. And that's the whole purpose for reading in the first place. Instructional strategies that focus on maintaining the author's meaning are more important than strategies for focusing on word accuracy and speed. And the third point I'll hit on a lot of different times tonight, the brain uses 3 cueing systems to recognize the words while reading: the semantic, the syntactic, and the phonological. Including only strategies and instruction to develop the phonological cueing systems, as is done in most skills-based phonics-heavy reading programs, severely impedes students' development as readers, especially those readers who might struggle with phonics in the first place. Now, traditionally, students who struggled with phonics were given more phonics instruction, so they could not be good at something to an even greater degree. Instead, phonics instruction should complement strategies and activities to develop the other 2 cueing systems. Now, studies like the Kusser study are essential in helping us understand reading, the reading process, and how the brain creates meaning with print. It is this understanding that enables us to design effective reading instruction and interventions. Now, research like this doesn't prove anything. It supports or doesn't support a hypothesis. Each study provides a bit of data, and these data are used to create theories. A theory, when used in the context of science, is not a disproven idea or an untested assumption. A theory is a way to explain a set of facts. Theories are used to understand and explain phenomena. Theory is a dot-to-dot picture connecting a variety of data dots, and each data dot is created by a research study. Different theories connect different data dots differently. Hence, you can have 2 or more theories explaining the same phenomena differently. In the case of reading, there are 2 common theories that will be explained in a bit. One theory connects a lot of data dots and accounts for a wide variety of phenomena. The other theory ignores many data dots and leaves much phenomena unexplained. One theory enables a more complete understanding of the phenomena known as reading, and the other does not. So let's pause here, think about those questions asked early on. And think about these questions for our second part. So, understanding reading. Let's look at the phonological processing model. This is the bottom-up theory of reading. The phonological processing model is based on the bottom-up theory of reading. And according to this theory of reading, reading is merely sounding out words on the page. This is called the simple view of reading, or the phonological processing model. And a model is a construct that explains or demonstrates how something works. Theoretical models are based on theories. According to this, reading is sounding out words. M, a, p. That is reading. Here, reading is thought to involve 4 sub-processes: perceiving the words and letters on the page, putting sounds to each of the letters in each word, putting the individual sounds together to identify the words, and putting the words together to create ideas. This is said to happen in the microseconds available as our eyes pounce upon individual words. Poof! Magic! Reading happens! This is thought to create a form of speech in the head with which the reader listens to during reading. And according to the phonological processing model, reading is sounding out words. Proficient readers are able to sound out words automatically and fluently so that the speech in the head is uninterrupted. They then just sit back and listen. According to this model, struggling readers have sounding out word deficits. So to move from struggling to proficient, we just need to apply a bit more sounding out word instruction, or so it is thought. So according to the phonological processing model, during the act of reading, information flows one way, from the page to the relay station in the brain called the thalamus, and then up to the cortex. From the bottom, which is the page, up to the top, which is the cortex. Hence the name bottom-up theory of reading. And as stated earlier, struggling readers, according to this model, have sounding out word deficits. So we give them a whole bunch of sounding out word instruction, along with lots and lots of drill and practice, sounding out words in isolation and on worksheets. And we think the problem is solved. The goal of sounding out word instruction is to create good sounder outers. The thinking is that if students were just good sounder outers, all their reading problems would vanish. But this is not the case. What usually happens is that struggling readers may get marginally better at sounding out isolated words in the short term. But when this is the sole focus of reading instruction, there's little transfer of these skills to authentic reading situations. And in the long term, there's no noticeable improvement in students' ability to create meaning with print during authentic reading situations. And in the meantime, children are deprived of the joy of reading good books and talking about good books. They're exposed to fewer words and concepts, and they fall behind in developing an implicit understanding of the sound and structure of the written language. The phonological processing of reading, phonological processing model of reading, does more to help us understand the reading process than to understand it. And the sounding out word model is limited because it doesn't account for a wide array of data, including 4 things. First, proficient readers look at only 60% of the words on the page. Of these fixated words where our eyeballs stop, our eyes usually stop on only 1 or 2 letters in that word. And since we can perceive only those things upon which our eyes fixate, it's clear that our brain fills in the blanks to create meaning during the reading process. This indicates that readers are using more than just the words and the letters on the page to create meaning. The second idea is that proficient readers often insert words that are semantically or syntactically correct. Again, this is called a miscue, and this points to the fact that information besides what's on the page is being used to construct meaning. The boy run down the road. Meaning is maintained. The girl jumped on the bed versus the bench, a noun for a noun. That is syntactically correct. Information other than what's on the page is being used. The third point, more information is flowing down from the cortex to the thalamus than from the thalamus up. We take in senses from our data from our senses, in this case our eyes. It goes to the relay station in the brain. And again, that's called the thalamus. From there, it goes up to various parts of the cortex. But brain imaging shows that during the act of reading, almost 10 times more information is flowing from the cortex down to the thalamus than from the thalamus up to the cortex. This demonstrates that what's in the head is being used along with text clues to create meaning. And the fourth idea, information from the cortex, is used to direct the eyes during the act of reading. In other words, higher level cognitive processes drive or mediate low level letter and word recognition processes. So before we go on to the other theoretical model, a bit about phonics instruction and research-based programs. I am not against phonics instruction. As a matter of fact, I am highly in favor of it. It's not the what of phonics instruction that is at issue here. It's the how and the how much of phonics instruction we need to consider. Phonics instruction is teaching letter-sound associations. The reader sees a letter and is able to associate it with a certain sound. Sound within a word is called a phoneme. There are approximately 200 phonemes in all human languages. There are 44 phonemes in our English language. There are 26 letters in our alphabet. This means our alphabet is 18 letters short. So rather than invent 18 new letters, somebody decided that we should put existing letters together in exciting new combinations. Brilliant! So we have diphthongs and murmur diphthongs and diagraphs and triagraphs, the schwa sound, R-controlled vowels, vowel blends, silent letters, soft letters, closed syllables, open syllables, diphthong syllables, blends, CVC patterns, CVCV patterns, CVVC patterns, one letter making another letter say its name, but it could be right next to it or jump over and skip a letter. And of course, we have exceptions. Exceptions. So, these research-based programs. Something about the science of reading. Whenever a particular program or method claims that it's research-based, when someone says that research proves that something is effective, you must always ask, effective for whom, for what purpose, under what circumstances, and for how long. Just saying that something is research-based doesn't mean that it is. It doesn't mean the research was very good. It doesn't mean a valid question was asked, and it doesn't mean that the data were correctly measured, collected, or interpreted. Some of these research-based reading programs may indeed produce a blip in low-level sounding out word scores. But a blip in sounding out word scores does not mean that a student is better able to create meaning with print. These blips often do not transfer into real-life reading situations. What this blip usually means is that you taught something, you measured that something you taught, and you found more of that something you taught after having taught it. Imagine that. That's like saying I sprinkled sand on the floor, and after I found that there was more sand on the floor. But the sand on the floor only means there's more sand on the floor. It has nothing to do with the dishes in the sink. So 3 questions always to ask of this type of research. As a result of this holy blip, are students better able to create meaning with print? And that's what reading is. It's a meaning-making endeavor, not a sounding out word endeavor. Does the research-based blip-making reading program improve students' ability to comprehend and make sense of what they're reading? Over time, is the blip-making program more effective than reading and talking about good books, writing and sharing stories, and learning skills in authentic contexts? And that is the question. Any exposure to print is helpful. Even blip-making programs have some impact. The question always comes back to this: is blip-making more impactful than meaning-making? That's the question, and I would answer absolutely not. And the third question to ask: do blips help children fall in love with books? The neurocognitive model of reading. This model accounts for the 4 unaccounted for facts just mentioned. This theoretical model of reading is based on the interactive theory of reading. According to the interactive theory, reading is creating meaning with print. During the act of reading, what's in the head interacts with what's on the page to create meaning, hence the name interactive. According to the neurocognitive model of reading, reading is not sounding out words, reading is creating meaning with print. Again, readers use what's in their head to make sense of what's on the page. There is almost 10 times more information flowing down than flowing up. And of course, reading is not sounding out words here. It is creating meaning with print. As we're reading, we use the knowledge stored in our cortex to constantly reach out and micro-predict the words in the sentences we're reading. This is called recognizing words. These micro-predictions enable our brain to work more efficiently. Our brain uses 3 cueing systems to make these micro-predictions to recognize words during the act of reading. And we're going to look at these now: the semantic, the syntactic, and the phonological. And their systems, meaning various parts of the brain, work together. The semantic cueing system is the most efficient of the 3 in terms of speed and space required in working memory. Semantic refers to meaning. As you read, you use the context and background knowledge in your head to recognize words and figure out what the next word might be. And you're doing that right now as you read the PowerPoints and as you listen to my voice. This is the semantic cueing system, using context. For example, in the sentence below, there's several possible words that would make sense: a pail, a lake, the ocean, water, or a tank. Birds fly in the sky, fish swim in. Most readers wouldn't need the 4 additional letters to recognize the word water. The beginning letter is sufficient. It would be inefficient to attend to all the letters. The monkey ate a. Most of us know what that is. She blank down the hill. Most of us know what that is using context. That is the semantic cueing system. The syntactic. Syntax has to do with grammar, the structure of the language, word order. As your brain reads, you use your knowledge of grammar, sentence structure, word order, tense, plurality to recognize words. This is the second most efficient cueing system, and I'm going to demonstrate this in a bit. Syntax, grammar, word order, sentence structure. She blanked down the road. Most of us know that a verb goes in there. Fish blank in water, a verb. Something sat, a noun. The dog blank on the rug. The dog did something. Syntax is learned implicitly, mostly. And then the phonological cueing system uses letter sounds to predict what the next word might be. Of the three cueing systems, this one is the least efficient. And why is that? Because it focuses on individual letters and letter patterns instead of words and ideas. Working memory has very limited capacity, short-term memory. It can hold about 7 bits of information for about 15 seconds before it begins to fade. Now, it can hold a few letters, a few words, or a few ideas. And since ideas contain far more information than individual letters, it's more efficient, to focus on ideas or meaning rather than individual letters. So, proof of the three cueing systems. Let's pretend we're reading and we encounter a word. Sound this word out. There are some who still insist that reading is simply sounding out words, and that the three cueing systems used to identify words is a bunch of baloney. So examine your own eye movement here. I'm sounding this word out. St, 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 ah, sta, sta. Stam, stam. Stamp. Oh, it's stamp, of course. Stamp. Stampy. I don't know what stampy is. Stamped. Oh, of course, it's stamped. He stamped on the floor. Stomped. Stamped. Well, that doesn't make sense. He stamped it on there. Stampede. Oh, yes, stampede. Now, when you see a word in a sentence, do you actually go through all this in the microseconds available? Rather, when we see a word, we see it holistically in the context of the sentence. Most of you were able to lightly dance upon the word stampede. Now notice when you see it in isolation, notice how the eye movement of your eyes differs when you see the same word in the context of the sentence and when you see it in isolation. And since buffaloes are often associated with stampede, the word acts as a primer when you encounter the word stampede. In the context of the sentence, your eyes probably just touched on it, or maybe the beginning letter of the word. Now, if you go back and read the word in isolation, you notice your eyes probably start at the beginning and work its way through in a choppy fashion, even though you saw the word in the previous sentence. And why does your eyes do that? Syntax and semantics. And you still don't believe me, and that's okay. I'm going to show you a paragraph, contains 110 words. Read these words as quickly as you can. Go. Okay. Now I'm going to have you read the same 110 words again. Read it as quickly as you can. And go. What? What? What did I do? What? This contains the same 110 words. And was your reading rate the same? What about fluency? Did you go smoothly from word to word? How about your eye movement? The first passage makes sense. The second passage contains the exact same words, but they're presented backwards. In this one, you're deprived of both semantic and syntactic clues. If reading was simply sounding out words, and if the three cueing systems was nonsense, your rate, accuracy, fluency, and eye movement would have been the same in both paragraphs, but they were not. You most likely read word by word in a very choppy, stilted manner with the second paragraph, very much like a struggling reader who's been subjected to too much phonics instruction, and who is trying to use only letter clues and not semantic or syntactic information to create meaning. Away drove Ankar. That's how a struggling reader often sounds when reading things out loud. So, 3 other things to consider here. During the act of reading, your brain uses as few letter clues as possible to recognize words. You're using the file folder in your head, known as schema, to make sense of things. And this is why I can read books about reading instruction or read them pretty quickly. But reading books about financial things, the same brain, similar words, but I go very slowly. Nothing up here related to financial information. We don't do that. It would take too long. It would use too much space in working memory, use minimal letter clues, and our eyes do not stop on every word. Vowels are not very important. We spend so much time on vowels and diphthongs. Let me show you. Most of you can read this, even though all the vowels have been removed, except if a vowel came at the beginning of the word. Once upon a time, there was a handsome prince. He lived in a castle. One day, an evil wizard came and turned him into a frog. The prince cried out, "Help me!" Get the idea? Even with the vowels removed, we can create meaning with print. Now, let's see if you can read the following sentence. All the consonants have been removed, and I'll even give you a hint here. This one is about a bear in the woods. Okay, see if you can read this sentence. Anybody? Anybody? The big black bear ran through the woods. Most people can get most of those words. Most of those words. How important are these vowels in the first place? All right, questions for you, and I'll pause here. All right, questions to think about as we go through the third part of this. But first of all, the story of Josie. Josie was a 3rd grade student in California with whom I worked online. Before our first session, I listened to her read passages at grade level 1.9. She read 50 words per minute with 97% accuracy. 7 weeks later, after 14 sessions, she read passages at grade level 2.5. Here she read 74 words a minute with 98% accuracy. Now, to diagnose and assess, I didn't need no stinking tests. Instead, I listened to her read. I noted the type of miscues that she made, and I watched her eyes. We need to watch the eyes of our readers. They tell us a lot. Now, noting what she was struggling with, we were able to focus our work specifically on the 2 deficit areas, reading fluency and word identification. There are, by the way, 3 deficit areas in reading: word identification, fluency, and comprehension. And not all struggling readers struggle in all 3 areas. Many beginning readers struggle with word identification and fluency, but not always. But it's often because they've been phoneticized. They've been over phonicsed, and they have not been taught the other word identification strategies. Phonics has been used to stamp all the joy of reading right out of them. Initially, when Josie came to a word she didn't recognize, she stopped and began looking at individual letters. She was obviously using only a single cueing system, 1/3 of her word recognition capacity. She would begin sounding out each individual letter. Letters and letter sounds soon filled her short-term memory. She was trying to hold all the letters and sounds and put them together to create words and understand and remember what she read at the same time. And remember, you can hold 7 letters, 7 words, or 7 ideas. And which is more efficient for creating meaning? Ideas. That's why meaning-based approaches to reading instruction and interventions that focus on ideas and meaning are generally more efficient than sounding out words. Sounding out words interventions that focus on reading. And by the way, what do we do when children are reading out loud and they come to a word they don't recognize? What do we say? We say, sound it out. Sound it out, as if they hadn't thought of that. If they could sound it out, they wouldn't have stopped in the first place. So here's my super duper, super special, super secret reading strategy. I told Josie to say blank and keep moving on. There you go. I could call this the Johnson method. I could create a specialized reading program and charge teachers and tutors lots of money to take my classes. They'd all get certified with the Johnson method. These Johnson teachers would be specially trained to tell students to say blank. They could even use multi-sensory say blank instruction to teach students to say blank. And that would be a grand thing. And I'd make lots of money off our struggling readers. And isn't that the way things are supposed to go? I wanted Josie to start using the ideas in her head as well as the clues around the target word to recognize it. It was quicker and easier than sounding out each individual letter. When she did this, when she said blank, she always figured out the word by the end of the sentence, usually 2 or 3 words down the line. So instead of 10 seconds and a lot of frustration, it took 1 or 2 seconds and no frustration to figure out the words. 10 seconds in frustration versus 1 or 2 with no frustration. Which one do you think might be better for creating meaning? A few weeks later, she told me I was magic because the words just popped into her head. Magic. I taught her to say blank and let her eyeballs bounce on both sides of the word. We also did a lot of close and maze activities where I taught her to use clues on both sides of the target word to figure it out. We did close and maze practice. Magic. I said, remember, if you see a word you don't know, say blank, skip it, and let your eyes bounce and look for clues. The elf blanked and hit his head. What are some clues? Make a guess. First letter. What are some clues? Yes, we would do several of these. It would take 6 to 8 minutes at most, and we'd move on to reading good books. These are close and maze activities. These are very blank garden pots. Clues on both sides and even picture clues sometimes. They have to choose the correct word. They're using semantics and syntax. Bob took his dog out for a... So we would do, I would say 6 to 10 of these. It would take us 5-6 minutes, and then we move on to our lesson. All the while, I'm doing a little teaching, but we're developing the ability. So she automatically begins to bounce her eyes on both sides of the word to find out what that word might be. Second thing is to stop correcting oral mistakes. When listening to students read orally, this is hard to do. Stop correcting them. Just stop it for 3 reasons. It deprives students of the ability to develop metacognition. This means thinking about thinking. Does this sentence make sense? Is it the right word? Two, it deprives them of the chance to develop the semantic and syntactic cueing system. If you jump right in, they don't get a chance to skip over. And three, students associate good reading with word reading accuracy. There's a hesitancy to make mistakes. This hesitancy to make mistakes results in slow, choppy word reading.